Welcome to this deep dive into Lesson 71 of the course. Today, we're going beyond the surface of what it means to rely on God for salvation, to really uncover what this concept truly means within the course's framework. I'm going to read Lesson 71 verbatim.
Okay, let's listen intently.
Only God's plan for salvation will work. You may not realize that the ego has set up a plan for salvation in opposition to God's. It is this plan in which you believe. Since it is the opposite of God's, you also believe that to accept God's plan in place of the ego's is to be damned. This sounds preposterous, of course. Yet after we've considered just what the ego's plan is, perhaps you will realize that however preposterous it may be, you do believe it. The ego's plan for salvation centers on holding grievances. It maintains that if someone else spoke or acted differently, if some external circumstance or event were changed, you would be saved. Thus, the source of salvation is constantly perceived as outside yourself. Each grievance you hold is a declaration and an assertion in which you believe that says, if this were different, I would be saved. The change of mind which is necessary for salvation is thus demanded of everyone and everything except yourself. The role assigned to your own mind then is simply to determine what other than itself must change if you are to be saved. According to this insane plan, any perceived source of salvation is acceptable, provided that it will not work. This ensures that the fruitless search will continue, for the illusion persists that although this hope has failed, there are still grounds for hope in other places and in other things. Another person will serve better, another situation will offer hope. Such is the ego's plan for your salvation. Surely you can see how it's in strict accord with the ego's basic doctrine, seek but do not find. For what could more surely guarantee that you will not find salvation than to channel all your efforts into searching for it where it is not? God's plan for salvation works simply because by following his direction, you seek for salvation where it is. But if you are to succeed as God promises you will, you must be willing to seek there only. Otherwise, your purpose is divided and you will attempt to follow two plans for salvation which are diametrically opposed in all ways. The result can only bring confusion, misery, and a deep sense of failure and despair. How can you escape all this? Very simply. The idea for today is the answer. Only God's plan for salvation will work. There can be no real conflict about this because there is no possible alternative to God's plan that will save you. His is the only plan that is certain in its outcome. His is the only plan that must succeed. Let us practice recognizing this certainty today. And let us rejoice that there is an answer to what seemed to be a conflict with no resolution possible. All things are possible to God. Salvation must be yours because of his plan, which cannot fail. Begin the 2 longer practice periods for today by thinking about today's idea and realizing that it contains 2 parts, each making equal contribution to the whole. God's plan for your salvation will work and other plans will not. Do not allow yourselves to become depressed or angry at the second part. It is inherent in the first, and in the first is your full release from all your own insane attempts and mad proposals to free yourself. They have led to depression and anger, but God's plan will succeed. It will lead to release and joy. Remembering this, let us devote the remainder of the extended practice period to asking God to reveal his plan to us. Ask him very specifically, what would you have me do? Where would you have me go? What would you have me say and to whom? Give him full charge of the rest of the practice period and let him tell you what needs to be done by you in his plan for your salvation. He will answer you in proportion to your willingness to hear his voice. Refuse not to hear. The very fact that you are doing the exercises proves you have some willingness to listen. This is enough to establish your claim to his answer. In the shorter practice periods, tell yourself often that only God's plan for salvation will work. Be alert to all temptation to hold grievances today and respond to them with this form of today's idea. Holding grievances is the opposite of God's plan for salvation, and only his plan will work. Try to remember the idea for today some 6 or 7 times an hour. There could be no better way to spend a half a minute or less than to remember the source of your salvation and to see it where it is.
This lesson really jumps right in contrasting the ego's plan with God's right from the start. It feels so pointed, almost urgent in its message.
Yeah, I'm struck by how the Course really reframes the idea of salvation as this internal shift rather than something external. Challenges those deeply ingrained beliefs that so many of us hold, even if we're, familiar with spiritual teachings.
That's so true. And the ego's plan, as the lesson describes, is incredibly seductive. It promises us happiness if only we can rearrange the world to fit our preferences, to soothe our grievances. It keeps us perpetually seeking outside ourselves, convinced that something out there will finally bring us peace.
And as the lesson states that ego's doctrine of seek but do not find ensures that this search just remains fruitless. We end up chasing after those fleeting external fixes instead of looking within where true salvation actually resides.
Right. We may intellectually grasp these concepts, yet still find ourselves falling into the ego's trap. Noticing that tendency, that subtle pull towards grievance and external validation, is crucial in our practice.
It really does raise such an important question. If God's plan is so different from the ego's, how do we practically shift our focus inward and align with his plan for salvation?
Yeah, that's the real work and the profound beauty of this lesson. The lesson urges us to ask, what would you have me do? Where would you have me go? What would you have me say? And to whom? And these deceptively simple questions really hold such profound implications for aligning with God's plan.
I'm so intrigued by how these questions guide us inwards. Like we have this direct line to our inner guidance, bypassing all of that ego chatter.
It really is. It's about surrendering our need to control, our insistence on having all the answers, and just opening ourselves to a wisdom that's beyond our limited perception. And, this can feel vulnerable, yet it's in that space of surrender that true guidance emerges.
That's a really good point. But how do we decipher that guidance? How do we know that we're hearing God's voice and not just our own desires or fears, sort of masquerading as intuition?
Yeah, that's a great question. Discernment is definitely an ongoing practice. It's honed through that consistent application of the Course's principles. And when we align with love, with forgiveness, with a desire for peace, we create a resonance that really amplifies God's voice.
It really resonates with me. It's like tuning a radio to the right frequency to pick up a clear signal.
Exactly. And, the ego's voice often manifests as judgment, as fear, as a sense of separation. God's voice, on the other hand, speaks through peace, through love, and this deep knowing that we're connected to something far greater than ourselves.
So as we deepen our understanding of the Course and we cultivate that inner stillness, we become more adept at distinguishing between these voices.
Precisely. And as we learn to trust that inner guidance, we're less likely to fall into the ego's trap of, seeking salvation through these external manipulations or validation.
This understanding of God's plan really sheds new light on the concept of grievances, which the lesson emphasizes as so central to the ego's plan. If we're no longer seeking these external fixes for our happiness, do grievances just simply cease to exist?
Well, grievances may still arise. Life presents us with challenges, disappointments, situations that trigger our ego's defenses. But the key difference lies in how we choose to perceive and respond to those triggers.
So instead of dwelling in that resentment, blame the if-only mentality, we practice forgiveness and seek to understand the situation from a broader perspective.
Precisely. Forgiveness doesn't condone, hurtful actions, but it frees us from the chains of anger and bitterness that bind us to suffering. And this aligns us with God's plan, which recognizes the inherent unity beneath the surface level of conflict.
This brings us back to the question of what relying on God for salvation actually means in a practical sense. So it's not about expecting miracles to magically resolve all of our problems, right?
Right. It's about approaching life's challenges from a place of inner peace and trust, knowing that even amidst difficulties, we're never truly alone. And this shift in perception really allows us to access a strength and resilience that transcends our circumstances.
So it's about cultivating a sense of inner security that doesn't rely on external factors for validation or happiness. And this inner security allows us to navigate challenges with greater grace and equanimity.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that true salvation lies in our connection to something far greater than our individual selves, a connection that can never be broken regardless of our external circumstances.
But how do we practically cultivate that sense of connection when we're faced with these real-world problems like illness, financial hardship, or loss? These are situations that can easily trigger fear and despair.
It's in those very moments that we're called upon to deepen our trust in God's plan. And this doesn't mean ignoring the problem or denying our feelings. It means choosing to view the situation through a lens of faith, seeking guidance through prayer and meditation, and trusting that even in the midst of darkness, a light is guiding us toward a greater good.
So it's about holding on to hope, not in the sense of wishful thinking or naive optimism, but in the deeper sense of knowing that even amidst suffering, a loving presence is supporting us, guiding us, and working through us for a purpose that may not be fully revealed in this moment.
Exactly. Relying on God for salvation is a dynamic process. It's a continual surrender of our ego's limited perspective to embrace a broader vision of reality, a reality where love, peace, and interconnectedness are the ultimate truths.
This deeper understanding of Lesson 71 challenges us to go beyond that intellectual comprehension and truly embody these principles in our daily lives. It's a journey of continuous learning, refinement, and deepening our trust in the unseen forces that guide us towards true salvation. As we delve deeper into this idea of relying on God for salvation, I find myself reflecting on a passage from the workbook that says, I am determined to see things differently. And it feels incredibly relevant to our discussion.
Oh, absolutely. It's really at the heart of this lesson and the course itself. Choosing to perceive differently is so fundamental to relying on God for salvation. It's about shifting our perception from fear to love, from lack to abundance, from separation to oneness.
Yeah, I think it's important to clarify, this doesn't mean we just deny or suppress our emotions when we're faced with difficult situations. Yeah. The Course doesn't advocate for a kind of toxic positivity where we're pretending everything's fine when it's clearly not.
Right, exactly. It's not about, ignoring the reality of our experiences. It's about choosing to view those experiences through a different lens, a lens of love and understanding, even when things are tough.
So let's consider like a concrete example. We've talked about someone experiencing homelessness. How would this concept of seeing things differently actually help them in such a challenging situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. It wouldn't be about pretending they're not homeless. It would be about, helping them shift their focus from despair and helplessness to hope and possibility. Perhaps it's about recognizing the kindness of a stranger who offers them food, or finding gratitude for a moment of peace under a beautiful sky.
So it's about finding those glimmers of light, those moments of grace that exist even in like the darkest of times.
Exactly. And those moments, however small, can become these anchors of hope and strength. They remind us that even in suffering, love is still present.
And that connection to something greater than ourselves is what sustains us through those difficult times.
Mm-hmm. It gives us the courage to keep going, the strength to face our challenges, and the faith that things will eventually get better.
Now, the lesson also encourages us to ask, what would you have me do?
Mm-hmm.
How does that question tie into this idea of seeing things differently?
Well, when we ask that question sincerely with an open heart and a willingness to listen, we're inviting God to guide our actions. We're saying, I'm willing to let go of my limited perspective and be led by something greater. That's when we begin to see shifts both internally and externally.
So it's about taking inspired action, trusting that we're being guided to do the right thing, even when we're not entirely sure what that is.
Yes. And sometimes the right thing might be a simple act of kindness, like offering a kind word to someone who's struggling or donating to a cause that resonates with us. It doesn't have to be this huge, grand gesture.
It's the intention behind the action that matters.
Exactly. It's the intention to be a force for good in the world, to extend love and compassion to those around us, to be an instrument of healing and peace.
That's a really beautiful way to frame it. And it circles back to the fundamental question of this deep dive. What does it truly mean to rely on God for salvation? It's not passive. It's about actively engaging with life from a place of love and trust.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that we have a role to play in our own salvation. And that role involves choosing to see things differently, asking for guidance, and taking inspired action.
And the remarkable thing is that when we do those things, when we surrender to God's plan, we not only transform our own lives, but we also contribute to the transformation of the world around us.
I love that. Every act of love, every moment of forgiveness, every expression of kindness creates a ripple effect that extends far beyond ourselves.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a thought-provoking question. What if relying on God for salvation isn't just about our personal peace and happiness, but about contributing to the collective awakening of humanity? What if it's about co-creating a world where love, compassion, and understanding prevail?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Lesson 71. It's been such an enriching exploration.
Until next time, may you find peace and guidance as you continue your journey with the Course.